Welcome to Beyond My Crisis. I'm your co-host, Ron Rossnick.
And I'm Vivian Gaspar. We are here to bring families together who have been victimized by Child Protective Services. And here with us today is a federally admitted attorney, Vince Davies. He has over 30 years experience and has brought together thousands of families, and how he can reunite families is something that everyone needs to know what in practicality can be done. Vince, thank you so much for being here. We really need to know, what is your story? How did you arrive at doing such a heroic cause?
My parents met in Japan right after the Korean War, and about 3 years later, they were involved in a bitter custody battle. Now, World War II had just ended, and it was going to be very difficult for a Japanese woman who barely spoke English to win in the divorce court.
In the United States?
In the United States. As a result of the court decision, I didn't see my mother for another 17 years.
We're so sorry.
As a result of that, I decided to dedicate my practice to helping people and parents who have lost their children.
Wow, that's huge.
If someone finds themselves being contacted, and usually it's very much out of the blue, this is not something you're prepared for mentally, psychologically. What is the first thing someone should do if they're contacted by Child Protective Services?
The first thing they should do is contact a lawyer, specifically a Child Protective Services defense lawyer, so that they can know what they should do, because CPS laws are unlike any laws in the American court system.
How is that? Oh.
So getting a regular, like a divorce lawyer or some other lawyer is not going to serve that person very well.
No.
So they have to specifically get a Child Protective Services attorney.
Correct.
And in state by state, they use different monikers. Like in New Jersey, it may be DCP&P. In California, what is it called?
It's DCFS.
DCFS. Okay.
And I understand that it can change. I mean, in Jersey, it used to be called DFUS, DIFUS. DIFUS was the way we pronounce it.
So how do you find one of these attorneys? What do you do to find one?
Best thing is for referral services usually, or Google.
Mm-hmm.
For example, you could Google CPS defense lawyer.
Okay.
And that should come up with some names.
Are these laws state by state, even though the titles change, different counties, different areas, different states, or are these federal laws?
They're basically all the same laws. They're all guided by federal regulations, the Department of Health and Human Services.
Okay. So what would an attorney tell someone who had been called? What's going to happen? How would that change their result?
Well, the first thing that I do when I represent someone that has been contacted by Child Protective Services is I tell the client, do not speak to the social worker by yourself. You can't talk your way out of this.
You cannot talk your way out of it.
But wasn't telling the truth just is what sets you free? I mean, is keeping your family safe? That doesn't happen?
In most of the cases, I would say no.
Why is that?
The incentives monetarily for these government agencies is to take children out of your home, not to keep children with you.
I'm so sorry. Could you please back up and explain? You're trying to tell me and our viewing audience that the governmental workers are actually financially incentivized to remove children from their homes and away from their parents?
Well, not the workers themselves, but the agencies they work for.
I don't understand. How can that be? Can you explain what do you mean by that, please?
There's a $69 billion Child Protective Services budget from the federal government. And the way the states and the counties earn that money is by removing children from your home and offering you services to try to reunite you with your children.
What are the statistics? I mean, are the children kept safe while in this circumstance? Are they ever harmed?
They're harmed quite a bit. I would estimate, I read an article that approximately almost 2 children per day are killed while in Child Protective Services custody.
In the United States?
In the United States.
Okay. How does that happen? Why isn't this in the news? I don't hear about this at all.
They're confidential cases by law. So you naturally will not hear about one unless it's a family later suing the state or county agency because of a wrongful death claim.
Okay, so this is kind of like a gag order on any cases involving someone under 18 years old.
Yes.
Is this ever successful for parents who felt victimized? Perhaps it was an innocent situation, to sue the state. Is that a successful concept?
It is. It's very successful. In some states, It's the state agency, and in some states, it's the county agency who's responsible. And there are federal and state lawsuits all the time against these agencies and social workers.
So when I hear someone says, call an attorney, I think people get a little bit of fear, like, wow, that's going to be expensive. What does that mean, expensive? Like, what is someone going to be paying to get someone to help them get advocate?
You know, it would depend on the circumstances. You know, if it was a case against the county or the state and the social worker, generally civil rights attorneys that specialize in that area charge a contingency fee.
So it won't cost anyone anything. They get a third or something around there of whatever the proceeds are.
That's correct.
And that really helps families, because I'm sure as soon as someone hears the word lawyer, they immediately throw their hands up in the air saying, I can't afford a lawyer. I guess I'm doomed to be this victim, and who knows what can happen then further to the children or the parents.
But most important, we're saying today is don't do it on your own. Get an attorney. And that my personal firsthand experience, I wish I met you before my personal calamity occurred, and I would have gotten an attorney, and maybe things would have gone a lot smoother. So I completely agree with what you're saying, and I hope that other families really take that advice. If they can't afford an attorney, can they get a court-appointed attorney with Child Family Services?
Yes, in most states they can. Now, this is only a court-appointed attorney to represent them in the Child Protective Services courtroom,
Now,
not in suing the social worker in a separate case.
Understood. So that's just to help them with the laws if their kids are being taken away by some emergent event.
Yes.
And give us an example of what's common.
Well, typically, a social worker is not supposed to take your child away unless he or she has a court order, a warrant, or has witnessed an exigent circumstance.
what do you mean by that exigent circumstance?
A life or death situation.
Are they very specific possibilities?
No, it's on a case-by-case basis. But a lot of times, social workers will take a child from you and claim that it was an exigent circumstance when it was not.
Can you have cameras throughout your house, and would that be a good idea? Usually you have them, cameras that is, for in case of burglary. But if you do have them running and you can prove that there was no circumstances in order to have a child removed, would that be helpful to...
It would be extremely helpful.
Extremely helpful. Okay.
That could, prevent such a tragedy.
Right.
Especially would it be more needed if you were perhaps going through a divorce and you could feel tumultuous situation coming about?
Well, yes, especially if your spouse is that type of person that might make false allegations against you. Every day I hear that story.
So any false allegation, any allegation met with Child Protective Services, they have to investigate. They're mandated to go to the home and check it out. Now, if someone knocks on your door saying, "Can we come in?" what do we say?
Well, my advice is unlike most of the advice that most attorneys will give. I say do not let the social worker in your home unless they have a warrant or a court order.
Okay.
But shouldn't you just comply? I mean, couldn't they say later on during the course of any proceedings that may arise from that you were uncooperative? Could that be held against you?
It could, and on a scale of 1 to 10, that might be a 5. But if you let them in your home, that's a 10. So which do you want, the 5 or the 10?
And since we're unfamiliar with what they can do and how they're trained, it's just a foreign situation. We really have to protect ourselves first.
Right, but it's still America,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone knows, I think, from the movies, don't talk to the police without your lawyer present.
But wait, aren't these
That's
social
really
workers?
important.
What if they're not police though? Because unless police are knocking at your door, we know not to speak to a police officer without an attorney. But these aren't police officers, right?
Well, this is worse than the police, because police can only put you in jail. Social workers can take your children forever.
Do they have the same rights as far as what they can, could they arrest you or anything further?
No. Social workers do not carry guns. They do not carry badges. They do have identification,
Right.
but they can't arrest you. They can call the police on you and try to have you arrested, but they themselves can't do that.
Right. So the typical scenario is someone gets a call and social workers come and they say, we're investigating an incident that has occurred here. And my response as the parent is, I'm sorry, I cannot discuss anything with you. You'll have to speak to my attorney.
Right. And I would third party that. What I tell my clients is, tell the social worker that I have told you not to speak with them. And we'd like to set up a meeting as soon as possible where I will be present, where we can work all of this out.
Now, can an attorney that's court appointed be that advocate?
That person can be that advocate, but generally they won't be involved in the case at that point in time. So we're talking about something that's happening before your first court date.
So if I don't have an attorney, can I say to them, you're going to have to talk to my attorney? And they're going to say, who's your attorney? I'll let you know. Can you say, I'll let you know if you don't have an attorney yet?
Yes. More importantly, you can just say, look, I'm not going to talk to you without my attorney. Well, who's your attorney? I don't know. I'm going to find one within the next 24 hours, and I'll let you know then.
So that's
Perfect.
acceptable to do.
Great.
Yes.
So if you have Child Protective Services knocking on your door, you have a social worker, you are legally allowed to say, I will not let you in, I will not speak with you without an attorney, and that could be it. They need to walk away.
Correct. Now, they could have a court order or a warrant to inspect your home or to talk to your child. And they usually will say something like, well, if you're not going to let me in, I'm going to go get a warrant. And your response will be, that'll be fine. Because we want to do everything legal.
And then, of course,
Right.
we contact a Child Protective Services attorney such as yourself.
Yes.
And what I love is that even though you're in one state, you can actually work within any parameters of any state. You're in
In
California,
a federal case,
In a-
federal court, you can.
Correct.
but these are federal laws.
Correct. Now, most of these cases, when you're talking about a child being taken away, are run by the state in
Yes.
those state cases. And what I usually do is I put the person calling me from the different state in contact with a colleague who is in their state, or I make arrangements to go to that state and represent that person there in that state.
You're allowed to hop on a plane and make sure it's taken care of personally. That's within your parameters and abilities to do so.
Yes, I just have to apply with the judge to be able to appear in that state. They call it pro hoc vice.
Pro vice. Okay.
And is a CPS court, a Child Protective Services court, the same as any other court, a criminal court, for example?
How is
No.
it different?
No. Criminal court, when you're accused of a crime, they have to convict you with evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a very high standard.
And that's a specific legal term, beyond reasonable doubt.
Yes.
And that's above 51%.
Oh, it's more like 90, 95%.
Okay.
Wow, that's
Okay.
So with family court,
Well, this is juvenile court. Family court is divorce,
okay.
and child custody and visitation. Juvenile court is social workers taking my child away.
Okay, juvenile court.
different
Right.
court.
And in most states, they use two standards of evidence, a preponderance of evidence and clear and convincing evidence. To initially take your child away from you, though, they only need preponderance of evidence,
And how much is that? I mean, what does that mean?
more than the 50%
Higher than 50, 50.01%.
is a preponderance.
Now, people really do have a reason to, besides the fact that they should be taking this very seriously because the children otherwise might be taken away. What is the alternative like when Child Protective Services actually manages, because someone didn't know before now, to take a child out of the home? What happens if you could shed a little bit of light within the foster care system that they're then placed into?
Well, they're supposed to be placed with a relative. And I think all states have that law that relatives have to be investigated. The problem is, in my practice, I see that children aren't given to relatives freely and easily. They're usually put into a foster care system. And there's a big problem with that because foster parents, not all of them, but a lot of them do this as a business. And there may not be that caring and that loving that a young child will need.
Wait, what do you mean doing it as a business?
Well, it's like a profession.
So they get
So-
compensated to be a foster parent?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the state pays them a monthly fee, roughly $1,500+ a month.
It could be, depending on the age, the special needs of the child,
Right. If they're IEP or 504 or
physical
some- yeah.
disability, mental disability.
So if you have, can they have multiple children and genuinely make a good living at having foster children?
Yes, you can.
How many children is the maximum within a regular residential family home?
I've seen as many as 5 in one home.
5, and they're getting approximately $1,500 a child,
1,500 might be a little high.
or even $1,000. That's $5,000 a
Right.
month.
Right.
of regular income.
As I said, there are professional foster parents.
So have you found that there's many abuses in the situation because they're not doing it out of care for the children?
Well, I've seen that there have been a lot of problems. I've been doing this 30 years. I have seen a foster care parent who has caused the death of a child. I've been involved in cases where foster parents have physically abused children. I've been involved in cases where the foster parent has sexually molested the child.
And these are convictions that prevailed?
Some of them convictions, some of them not.
Are these abuses anomalies, or unfortunately are they frequent? What have you found?
I wouldn't say that they happen in every case, but they happen too many times.
So should there be cameras in these foster homes? As a parent, would I have any say as to approving a foster home?
No, you don't.
So I lose all my rights as a parent
They're
when that occurs.
The law says that they're temporarily suspended.
How long is temporary?
Well, it could be for a few weeks, a few months, a couple of years. It could be forever.
Forever is not temporary, because then of course they age out when they become 18. That's not forever.
Well,
And what about the psychological traumas of the children? As a parent, what do we do to help our children get through something like this?
all I can say is counseling. I'm not a mental health professional, and that's not my expertise.
Right.
But I have clients right now who have gotten their children back after a few months, and these children are substantially damaged emotionally. I'm not sure what's happening in those foster parents, in those homes.
Right.
What's happening to these children, but it's not the best place. Instead of focusing our money on taking children out of homes, we should focus on keeping them in there and providing services to keep children safe.
So wouldn't the children go through some psychological, they've just been ripped out of their parents, and some of these parents might be normal, everyday, regular parents, not even abusive homes they're taking them out of, and they're putting them into foster homes, which you said a lot of abuse has occurred in. Do they also give these children accompanying psychological help or therapy just to transition away from parents?
I've never seen that happen. They're supposed to give
They
some
have.
type of counseling.
I know they have.
They're supposed to provide that. The problem is, in a lot of cases, I have a case right now where this child needs a lot of counseling. And for some reason, the social worker is dragging his feet. I get the impression it's because of money, the intense counseling that the county has to provide this child. So they're putting it on the mother's lap and telling her, hey, you take care of it.
So when a parent gets their children back, hopefully they do, there's a new cost burden that these parents are going to have with helping their child psychologically get back into shape. And so the damage is done. Should a parent start documenting all the damage, dates, times, people involved, and should a lawsuit ensue to claim for monetary costs to help these children?
The short answer to that is yes.
Is it always yes or
Well,
sometimes?
it depends on the family.
Okay.
Bringing a lawsuit is a personal decision. In a lot of cases, it's going to be a family decision.
So basically we're suing the social worker or the agency.
Correct. The state and or the county.
So, but the reason to sue is not because you're being opportunistic. The reason and the reality, as Ron was saying, is these children have been traumatized. They possibly could deal with PTSD and long-standing psychological issues that you might need as a parent help to pay for.
Absolutely true.
So now who would sue? Would the parent sue, or on behalf of the child?
It could be both or either or.
Is there a
And-
statute of limitations?
There is. Generally, the federal statute is
And-
1 to 2 years.
And what kind of attorney do you have to find for that?
A civil rights attorney who sues social workers and agencies. A lot of attorneys.
That's a very specific kind of attorney.
Yes.
A civil right attorney that only pretty much does cases with social workers and these agencies.
Most civil rights attorneys would take a case if there was police brutality. The problem is that when you add the social worker factor involved, you have to know the laws and the procedures of the underlying CPS case in the Child Protective Services courtroom. And most civil rights attorneys don't know that. So you want to get an attorney that does both areas of law or who specializes in suing social workers.
And with your experience doing these kind of suits, How many of these cases do you feel are of merit?
All of the cases that I take, I feel that they are of merit. You know, a lot of people have reservations about suing. Just generally, people look down on suing in our society.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes, in order to protect your rights and to protect your children, you have to sue to get compensation so that they'll be taken care of.
Yes, for our children, we have to do that. We have to be the advocates, and sometimes it's a hard step to take.
Right.
But aren't there additionally further ramifications to this family? I mean, what is the average length of time that it takes for a parent to regain custody after the children are removed?
Well, that varies from case to case. We could get them back to you within a couple of days, a couple of weeks, a couple of months, sometimes a year, 2 years. Recently, I represented a grandmother, and the child had been out of her care for about 3 years.
Was there a reason for it that was substantiated of abuse in the home that the child was removed from?
No. As a matter of fact, she did not get her grandchild placed in her home because about 20 years ago, a false CPS report was made against her, and it was in the records.
How do you expunge that?
It was very difficult.
So can these false records or allegations be expunged so they're not ruining someone's reputation?
Expunge may not be the correct term, but
Okay.
yes, you can get them removed or get them set aside or get it so that the judge doesn't consider something that may or may not have happened 20 years ago.
And how do they know if there's even anything on the record since they're so sealed?
They're not sealed to the agencies, to the Child Protective Services agencies. They're not sealed.
So you would subpoena that for discovery and see if there's anything there?
I would, but in this particular case, they told us we're not giving your client the child because of allegations that were made against her 20 years ago.
So during this entire process, regardless of how long it takes for you to fight to regain the child's custody with the parents, or a good custodial, for example, the grandmother in this case, but let's say it's the parents, this could be very, very disruptive to this parent who's going through this trauma of regaining custody of their children. What other tragedies or crises did you actually have known about that could have stemmed from this? I mean, they can't work. They're told to, by these social workers, to make sure they attend all the meetings, make sure they're on time, don't miss a single meeting or you might mess up your opportunity
Right,
or jeopardize
their
it.
work is definitely going to be in jeopardy.
Yeah, how do they
because-
earn a living? How do they work? Could they have
It's
lost
virtual-
a home or other ramifications?
I've seen many cases where people have lost their jobs, their homes, their businesses, because what the courts or the social workers want them to do is so onerous. They want them in parenting and counseling and drug testing and drug counseling, maybe 4 or 5 days a week for 2 or 3 hours a day.
And that's in the middle of the day during a work day because they
Right.
don't do it after hours because the social workers work during the day.
But
Correct.
can't you get punitive damages then, therefore, because of these additional burdens
Is
and
that-
traumas?
Is that is that part of the lawsuit? Could
Yes.
that be added to?
So a lot of our cases we bring under Section 42 USC 1983, which is the general civil rights statute in the country. And part of that statute allows you to ask for punitive damages against the social worker and the counties and states.
Could you please, because punitive damages are important, because as you just mentioned, people not just jeopardize their livelihoods, their jobs, but you also have mentioned they've lost their homes, their family homes, fighting to regain custody.
Yes.
What are some examples of what these lawsuits have yielded?
There was a sort of a famous case in Los Angeles County where a colleague of mine tried about 2 or 3 months ago, and I think he won over $3 million. Not too long ago, we settled a case for almost $1 million. It was $999,900.
Are these common numbers? What's a lower number? What's a number that is that typical or?
It's typical when the social worker, where you can show that there's wrongdoing.
Okay.
Can you just provide us with 3 easy tips as what can someone do in process of regaining their children if they've already lost them?
Sure. Take this matter seriously. A lot of people don't take this seriously because these social workers don't have guns and badges. It is serious. They can take your child away from you, and it could be for a long period of time, if not forever. Number 2, don't talk to the social worker. I know you think that you're going to be able to talk your way out of this. You're not. They're highly trained professionals, and it is their job to prove a case against you. Number 3, at the initial stages of the case, there's something called a team decision-making meeting, where they ask you to come and they gather evidence against you to use against you in court. Don't go to that meeting. At least don't go without an attorney. You're not required to go to that meeting, so don't go.
Thank you very
Wow.
much.
Thank you very much on
Certainly.
this.
This
really.
is really crucial information. There are many, many people out there, unfortunately victimized, who have lost their children. Please follow Vince's advice. Contact him. He can help you in any state. Your children are worth it. Don't give up hope. Fight. It is definitely worth it.